In the brutal world of combat sports, words can cut as deeply as punches. Fighters often posture and provoke, believing that psychological warfare begins long before the opening bell. Trash talk becomes a rite of passage, a ritual that turns press conferences into battlegrounds and weigh-ins into theaters of intimidation. For some, the microphone is mightier than the sword, but in the end, no amount of talk can hide the truth inside the ring. When the gloves are on and there's nowhere to run, the harshest punishment often awaits the loudest voice. Time and again, we've seen brash mouths humbled by brutal reality, proving that in combat sports, karma doesn't forget an aim. Adrian Broner was the epitome of a fighter who talked himself into trouble. In 2013, Broner faced Marcos Maidana, a rugged Argentinian with fists like anvils and a temperament forged in grit. But Broner wasn't interested in Maidana's resume. He was too busy crafting his own myth. He mocked Maidana's heritage and dismissed him as a fanboy desperate for a photo op. "He doesn't want to fight me," Broner said. "He just wants to meet me in person, take a few pictures, and shout me out on Instagram." Broner painted himself as untouchable, but what unfolded in the ring was anything but. Maidana took the fight to Broner from the opening bell, delivering a sustained beatdown that left Broner clinging, crying, and begging for mercy. By the final bell, the illusion was shattered. The crowd didn't just witness a defeat, they watched a persona collapse in real time. Broner didn't just lose a belt, he lost his armor of arrogance. Julius Long, a towering figure with more height than skill, found himself on the wrong end of poetic justice in 2019. Facing Hemi, the Heat, Ahio, a stocky but explosive New Zealander, Long leaned into his favorite weapon, his mouth. At the weigh-ins, Long postured like a cartoon villain, mocking Ahio with nonsensical boasts about cooking grease and pies. But the Tongan fighter, unmoved and composed, offered no rebuttal. He didn't need to. Once the bell rang, the difference between empty bravado and focused violence became glaringly clear. Long tried to clown, tried to taunt, but the moment Ahio connected, the giant came crashing down like a felled tree. The knockout wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. Long's antics had made him a meme, and now his defeat completed the punchline. Even champions fall prey to their own hubris. Stephen Fulton Jr., the unified super bantamweight champion, saw himself as the man to derail Naoya Inoue's rise in 2023. At press events, Fulton was dismissive. "He's only hyped because he's Japanese," he claimed, minimizing Inoue's accomplishments. Fulton believed his own narrative, that he was smarter, sharper, and more tested. But once the fight began, it was clear who had been living in reality and who had been living in illusion. Inoue, silent but surgical, tore through Fulton's defense and dismantled his ego. Fulton was left dazed, stunned not just by the punches but by the realization that his mouth had written a check his chin couldn't cash. In the world of MMA, few figures embodied empty bravado like Bob Sapp. A mountain of muscle with a history of questionable fights and dubious performances, Sapp often picked opponents who posed little threat. But when he signed to fight Mariusz Pudzianowski, a five-time world's strongest man, the dynamic changed. Sapp released a video mocking his Polish opponent, suggesting he hit like a girl. It was classic Sapp, cartoonish, loud, and wholly unserious. But when the cage door shut, there was no script to follow. Pudzianowski dragged Sapp into a pit of violence he couldn't climb out of. What followed was less a fight and more a beating. Sapp, who once sold himself as an unstoppable force, ended up looking like a man who had wandered into the wrong arena. The beating was so severe it silenced even his most loyal fans. Caleb Plant made the mistake of treating Canelo Alvarez like an equal. In the build-up to their bout, Plant constantly disrespected the Mexican icon. During their face-off, he even swung at Canelo, only to be countered with lightning speed. Canelo didn't say much. He didn't need to. In the ring, he delivered a cold, methodical beating that left Plant broken over 10 rounds. Plant entered the fight with swagger. He left with silence. The contrast between his confidence before the fight and his shattered expression afterward was as loud as any punch Canelo threw. Keith Thurman had a decorated resume and a penchant for trash talk. Before his bout with Manny Pacquiao in 2019, Thurman reduced the Filipino legend to a punchline. "He's not Tupac," Thurman laughed. "He's a bunny rabbit." But Pacquiao, though well into his 40s, wasn't a man to be dismissed. In the opening round, he floored Thurman with a perfect shot, sending the American into a panic he couldn't hide. Though Thurman lasted the distance, he spent most of the fight chasing ghosts, trying to regain a foothold in a fight he never truly controlled. Afterward, the smirk was gone. The wisecracks were gone. All that remained was a humbled fighter staring at a man he thought was finished. Edison Miranda fancied himself a power puncher and a menace, but Lucian Bute saw through the charade. Leading into their fight, Miranda leaned on theatrics, taunting Bute and dismissing his skill. Inside the ring, Miranda continued the showboating, trying to lure Bute into his trap. But Bute was a technician, not an entertainer. When the opening came, he didn't hesitate. A single uppercut changed everything. Miranda fell forward, collapsing under the weight of his own arrogance. He had played the clown. Now he was the tragedy. Antonio Nieves is another example of a fighter who misunderstood his opponent. When he signed to fight Naoya Inoue, Nieves didn't just underestimate him, he disrespected him. He mocked Inoue's record and questioned the legitimacy of a fighter who had spent most of his career in Japan. Nieves believed he was the real test. But Inoue treated the fight as an opportunity to silence a doubter. With clinical efficiency, he broke Nieves down. The American was game, but by the 5th round, he had absorbed enough punishment for his corner to call it off. It wasn't just a technical knockout, it was a moral defeat. Bor Abdulaziz strutted into his fight with Moscat Espilot riding an undefeated record and an inflated ego. Known for disrespectful behavior and dirty tricks, Abdulaziz was the kind of fighter who thrived on controversy. But Moscat was no stranger to chaos. He remained stoic throughout the build-up and let his performance do the talking. Inside the cage, he dismantled Abdulaziz with precision. Kicks, punches, takedowns, it was a complete beatdown. When it ended, there was no showboating, no celebration. Just a broken man lying in the cage, abandoned by the words that once gave him power. Magomed Vakayev tried to play the bully against Tony Johnson, a fighter known for his grit and quiet demeanor. What began as a respectful handshake quickly dissolved into mind games and arrogance. Vakayev tried to assert dominance, both physically and verbally. But karma isn't impressed by confidence, it rewards action. Johnson bided his time and waited for the perfect moment to strike. When he did, it was devastating. Vakayev, who had spent so much energy trying to dominate mentally, found himself flat on his back, trying to remember how it all unraveled. Ricardo Mayorga was a master of the dark arts of trash talk. Before facing Shane Mosley, he crossed every imaginable line. He mocked Mosley's family, disrespected his partner, and turned the promotion into a circus. But inside the ring, Mayorga quickly realized Mosley wasn't playing games. Round after round, Mosley punished him, stripping away the bravado punch by punch. By the 6th round, Mayorga was finished. He clutched his body and crumpled to the canvas. He had been louder, but Mosley had been better. In the end, skill silenced slander. Even in less publicized fights, the lesson holds. Fighters like Billy Joe Saunders mocked Canelo Alvarez, promising a knockout and an upset. But by the 8th round, Saunders was waving off the fight from his corner, unable to continue after Canelo shattered his orbital bone. The bravado had vanished. The fight ended not with a bang, but with a silent nod, a signal that the talk was over and the price had been paid. And another instance, Lamont Roach challenged the brash and unbeaten Tank Davis in a bout many assumed would be a mismatch. Davis mocked Roach openly, predicting a knockout and dismissing his challenge as a joke. But Roach wasn't interested in headlines. He was focused. Throughout the fight, he pushed Davis to the edge, and in the 9th round, he landed a shot that forced Davis to take a knee. Davis claimed it was an eye issue, but the crowd saw the truth. The cocky champion had been rocked. Though the bout was scored a draw, had the knockdown been called correctly, it would have been a historic upset. Davis, who had entered as a lion, left with the unmistakable look of a man who had been humbled. The sport of fighting is unforgiving. It doesn't care about your social media following, your pre-fight speeches, or your viral moments. Inside the ring or cage, only one truth matters. You either back it up, or you get broken down. Trash talk is a double-edged sword. When backed by brilliance, it becomes legend. But when hollow, it invites humiliation. And in a sport where consequences are physical, mental, and emotional, there's no more painful price to pay than being exposed. And in the end, the mouth can start the show, but the fists always finish it. For every fighter who built themselves up with noise, there's an opponent who brought silence with a single moment. And for every boast, there's a punch waiting to collect the debt. Because in the world of combat sports, karma isn't just real, it hits harder than any left hook.